In today's show, we talk about the trade that launched 1,000 aprons. Plus, it's getting crowded at the bottom of the standings. Welcome to Locked On Blazers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Trailblazers, your daily Portland Trailblazers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, world? It's your past first point guard and Trailblazers reporter, Mike Richmond. You're listening to another episode of Locked On Blazers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get podcasts and also on YouTube. Thanks for making this show your first listen. Coming at you each and every weekday, Monday through Friday, so make it a part of your daily routine. Make it your first listen. Tell your friends to do the same as Locked On Blazers, your team every day. In today's show, we're back at the rumor mill, and we're mining those sweet rumors as they churn, plus a fun story about the first move Joe Cronin made and how it got us into this mess. And by us, I mean the entire NBA. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about the Brooklyn Nets joining the hunt for the bottom of the standings in earnest, where we always thought they would be all along. And just the sort of general what we know as we hit fake/real for once trade season at December 15th, which marks the time when trade season usually just starts in name only, but actually finally started with some real transactions. Let's get into it. Let's start here with this is not really news, but I think it's a funny story to for like a scene setter for specific to the Portland Trailblazers. So on Friday, the Hoop Collective with Brian Windhorst, which is a video podcast and YouTube show with Brian Windhorst of ESPN. I think it's a podcast first, to be quite honest, but just everyone has to do YouTube now, including me. Thanks for watching. If you are watching, hit the subscribe button, like it, comment, do all the things that drive that sweet, sweet algorithm. Just type Norm in the comment section. Hit me up with a Norm. So Brian Windhorst, the first half of Friday's program on the Hoop Collective, he interviews Norman Powell of the Clippers. Norm's killing it, right? He's 31 years old. And he's having maybe the best season of his career. He's just absolutely balling. I mentioned on a prior show that's like, I don't think Norm can win Most Improved Player because like that's not who they give it to anymore. That's just like not the type of player that earns that. But in the past, when the award was different, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Norm would have absolutely been he would have been the front runner because they gave it to like a breakout veteran, the Hedo Turkoglu's of the world. But in any case, Windy has Norm on the program, and they chat about Norm's career. And then about a half hour into the show, Brian Windhorst starts talking to Norm. No, it's Norman Powell. Stormin' Norman. He's talking to Norm about, when you got traded to the Trailblazers. And he this is the exact quote. I'm gonna quote from exactly from Windhorst here. When the Clippers traded for you, it was like the straw that broke the camel's back with the owners. What Windy goes on to say is that when the Clippers in February of 2022 acquired Norm, he was at breakfast with an owner in Los Angeles, and the owner got the news, and the news broke, and the owner lost. He uses the pronoun he, for those of you thinking it was definitely Genie Bus, but he used the pronoun. He said the owner loses his mind, and was like, super upset. I can't believe they got Norman Robert Covington. And then it was, and Windhorst jokes like, this is probably what caused, the new CBA. And Norm's like, yeah, I guess they wanted a new CBA after that. And Windhorst clarifies that this is not the trade that directly led to a new collective bargaining agreement in the NBA, but it was one of the types of deals, and it was perhaps the biggest example of a deal where the other owners looked out into the world and cried poverty, and they said, how dare Steve Ballmer and how dare Joe Lacob possibly be willing to spend so much money for role players? How dare they? We need some rules, and we need a hard cap on how much teams can spend, and it needs to be very punitive if they spend more than that, because we're the broke kind of billionaires and they're the super rich type of billionaires. You're billionaires. You own one of 30 teams in the league. Just spend the money. The artificial hard cap is, in my opinion, pretty whack. But I will say player salaries, absolutely bonkers now. So it's a tough balance. It's a tough balance. But why this Norman Powell trade is funny to me is it's literally the first piece of business that Joe Cronin did. Technically, it's not, actually. Cronin gets hired in December of 2021. The very first thing, I looked at the transaction log under Joe Cronin when he was still interim GM. He's named interim GM in December. The first piece of business he does when he's as an interim GM, before he gets the job full time, is sign Keljin Blevins to a 10-day contract on Christmas of 2021. Christmas Day, 2021, Damian Lillard's cousin, Keljin Blevins, gets a 10-day contract. It's literally the first piece of business Joe Cronin ever does as the acting GM of the Portland Trail Blazers. That is amazing. I am so thankful that is a piece of information I got to learn this evening in researching for the show. It always pays to look stuff up because you will find something amazing. Shout out to Keljin Blevins. Truly America's Nepo baby. But the first real piece of business, the first actual stuff, Joe Cronin signed some 10-day guys, shout out to Cameron McGriff, among others. But the first deal he made is a blatant cost-cutting deal. I know at the time, they didn't get a pick. It was Keon Johnson is almost like getting a first-round pick. Sure, whatever. It was a blatant cost-cutting deal. It was getting the Blazers, who were a mediocre to trending towards straight-up bad team, they ended up picking 7th in the draft. They had the 5th worst record in the league by the end of the year. It was they're heading towards being a very bad team in the second half of the season, and intentionally so. And in doing so, they are also going to cut salary because they're in the luxury tax. And so they find a trade. They craft this trade where they basically just don't take back long-term money that is going to be, that is going to hamper them in any way. And they get Norman Powell. They send Norman Powell and Robert Covington to the Clippers. In return, Eric Bledsoe, who never played for them, Justice Winslow, Keon Johnson, a second-round pick. But importantly, it got the Blazers out of the tax, and it added $19 million to the Clippers' tax bill, who were then paying an extra $113 million in taxes. And that's what pissed off the owners. It's back in February of 22. That's what pissed off the fellow owners. That's why someone was so mad at breakfast with Brian Windhorst, because the Blazers had such a blatant salary dump, such a sort of take our long-term money. We signed Norman Powell to this 5-year, $90 million contract, and we immediately regret it. And by we, I mean the previous GM did this. Now there's a new dude in charge, and he doesn't want anything to do with that Norman Powell contract. Sizable, wouldn't have been good for the Blazers to hold on to it on the books for these years. Norman Powell would be the Blazers' best guard by a pretty wide margin. Right now, if he's playing like he is in Los Angeles, if he wasn't still in Portland. Obviously, that's not how it works. But in any case, later, within a few days, Joe Cronin would trade C.J. McCollum and acquire Josh Hart, and among other things, and a trade exception that would allow him to get Jeremy Grant. This is big business. This is the beginning of big business. But I find this extremely funny that we are now in this restrictive apron era, right, where there is a lot of speculation from folks who cover the league and who talk to people across the league that there's just not going to be a lot of big fish moving this offseason or this trade cycle, this trade deadline, and particularly sort of the mid-range fish, maybe Jimmy Butler gets traded, but the middle, the Zach LaVines, the guys who aren't quite top-tier stars but are paid very well, which the Blazers have a couple of them, it might be challenging to move those contracts because the new CBA was instituted, and now this, was slow rolled out. And now this year that it's fully in effect, the restrictive and punitive penalties of the first apron, which is a line of about $8 million above the luxury tax line, and then the about $10 million more than that is the second apron, which is even more punitive. And if you stay above that line for multiple seasons, there's all types of penalties that you incur and some team building challenges that you incur. And the most restrictive CBA in the history of the NBA, launched by trading Norman Powell to the Clippers. By Joe Cronin's first ever trade, he broke the camel's freaking back and gave us this new CBA. Is Joe Cronin personally responsible for how hard it is to trade players on his roster right now? No, obviously that's not how it works, but it is extremely funny to connect the dots, perhaps unfairly, is that Joe Cronin boxed himself in by the first move he ever made it so he could never make moves again in the future, because he just has kind of held on to these large salary slots forever as he's moved forward, never prioritizing expiring money, always prioritizing chances to be making moves in the trade market. Well, the trade market done dried up on you, and it's because you traded Norm day one. Day 70, roughly, got the job in early December. That was in early February. Yeah, 60 days, give or take, 58 days. Okay, let's talk at the bottom of the standings. They just got more crowded. Here come the Brooklyn Nets. They are so freaking tired of winning that they're going to do what it takes to make sure they join the Trailblazers and the Wizards and the Jazz and the Pelicans, unfortunately, at the bottom of the standings. Let's talk about it. Join me in that second segment. First, though, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook and an official sports book of the NFL. And right now you can tackle all your NFL action because new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, and all you got to do is win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. The Brooklyn Nets are tired of winning. They are so dang tired of all these victories. They must and they will start to lose, and they did. They got absolutely smoked by the Cavs on Monday evening. Mission accomplished. The Brooklyn Nets were picked by the good folks at FanDuel to have they had the lowest over-under total of any team in the league heading into the season. They were the prognosticators figured that they would get the fewest wins of any team in the NBA this season. They've already won 10 games. They're 10-16 after losing this evening. But that's just too dang many for them. The FanDuel line early in the season, or for the Nets at the beginning of the season, prior to the season kicking off, is 18.5. They've already won 10 of them in their first 26 games. That's too many. They got to start losing. So that's what they did. They dumped one of their best players in exchange for mostly nothing. Reese Beekman, a two-way player. The Brooklyn Nets agreed to a trade for Dennis Schroder, veteran point guard, 31-year-old German point guard. Sent him to Golden State in exchange for injured DeAnthony Melton out for the season with an ACL injury. And two-way player Reese Beekman. The Nets, for their troubles, acquire 3 second-round picks, and they send back a second-round pick to Golden State. Golden State gets a 2025 pick. They otherwise didn't have a second-round pick. That's valuable to them. The Nets get future picks. And what they really do is they get off of Dennis Schroder. Schroder, when it was traded, the Nets were 10-15. They had the 9th worst record in the league, but they were still on the cusp of the freaking East play-in. They were going to play postseason basketball if the playoffs have started. Obviously, the playoffs start in April, but it was getting a little dicey for them. They're just straight up winning too many games for their goals. And by what I mean by that is that the Brooklyn Nets traded this summer. There's a failed experiment with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden, and they had sent out a bunch of their own firsts in acquisition of those stars, specifically James Harden, not the others who came in free agency. But in pursuit of James Harden adding to the trio, they had traded away some first round picks in that acquisition. And they traded back for their own 2025 first. They said, we want our pick back. And they kind of paid a hefty price to do so, right? They overpaid to get their own pick back. You don't overpay to get your own pick back to finish with the 7th best record or 7th worst record in the league. You overpay to get your own pick back to stink, to get one of the top 2 to 3 picks, no worse than 3rd in the NBA. The Nets have a goal to lose, and so they traded Dennis Schroder in order to lose. Welcome to the party. The Blazers already in the party. Blazers owners of the longest losing streak in the NBA at 6 straight. They right now, this is up to the second. I'm recording this during the last 2 Monday games, about 8 o'clock on Monday evening. Last 2 Monday games. You listen to Tuesday, December 17th show. So there's a couple that are going to finish up after this. But the Nets have lost and Philly has won as I am recording this. So like the Blazers, the 6th worst record in the league, Brooklyn at 10-16, 8th worst record in the league, Philly going the other direction because they're finally winning games at long last. They're in between Brooklyn and Philly. And then Charlotte, Toronto, Utah, New Orleans, Washington. Those are your 5 worst records in the league in reverse order. Charlotte, Toronto, Utah, New Orleans, Washington. Just watched the end of a Toronto game that they managed to lose, and Detroit and Chicago, to Chicago, and Detroit held on to beat Miami. I've been watching some bad basketball before I record this. Some bad basketball teams getting ready for the tank. But that means that there's just more folks earnestly joining the Blazers' path to the bottom. What does this mean for the Blazers in the big picture? Not a ton, because you knew this was eventually going to happen with teams like Brooklyn. You knew this was eventually going to happen. But when you trade Schroder, who's averaging 18 points, 3 boards, 6.6 assists, shooting 39% from 3, 38.7% from 3, he's been legitimately very good for the Nets, who had for a while to begin the season one of the 10 best offenses in the league. Schroder was the engine of a team that was playing really well under Jordi Fernandez, and when you play well on a team that doesn't want you to play well, then, if players and coaches succeed in a situation where they are not supposed to, then management takes it out of their hands. And that's what they did. Took it out of their hands. No way. Absolutely not. We're just going to play. We don't really have point guards on the roster outside of Schroder that can get us into what we need to get into. Cam Thomas is not that. Okay, we can really handicap the success of this franchise if we make these moves. And we've seen the Blazers do this in the past, like when they traded Norman Powell to the Clippers and then CJ McCollum to the New Orleans Pelicans, and made sure the team would lose games, sat guys down the stretch and made sure the teams would lose games. This is just a more an earlier move there, an earlier pivot there. But the earlier pivot in and of itself is due to the new CBA. Blame Cronin. Blame Norm. I'm just kidding. I want to be clear because some of y'all really are up in arms about Joe Cronin. There is a cajillion reasons to be critical of the Blazers front office. They're myriad. We'll talk about them later this week in the show. I'm certain. We talked about them in yesterday's show, right? It is what it is. They haven't identified enough quality players to make you feel really good about the direction that they're going, right? And if you want to be critical in that way. Don't be critical about this. This is just funny, stupid stuff. Joe Cronin created the second apron. Joe Cronin traded Norman Powell so egregiously that he can't trade DeAndre Ayton ever again. Joe Cronin salary dumped Rocco so hard that the league rewrote its rules. In any case, the CBA has changed. And I have mentioned this in recent shows, is that December 15th, which was Sunday, is typically just the start of quote unquote trade season in name only. I'm a big reader of the Stein line, Mark Stein, and now Jake Fisher has joined the program. And Stein always likes to point out there are actually trades relatively close to December 15th if you look at the history of the league, but they're usually a month out at least. Post-Christmas, early January, you start to get a little bit of action. You get the OG Anunoby trades, the Pascal Siakam deals, and then other stuff, comes around, and you get more deals around the trade deadline. But very rarely do you get a trade this early because there isn't incentive to do so, except this time there is. This time there's incentive to do so by acquiring Dennis Schroder prior to December 16th. There is a new rule in the CBA, and I learned this from reading John Hollinger of The Athletic. I was not poring over the CBA myself, and one thing I'm good at is reading and synthesizing that information here for you. Some would call me a high-level aggregator. I would call me a high-level aggregator, in fact. I'm good at it. And here's some aggregation for you. I read this in John Hollinger's weekly column on The Athletic, is that there is a rule now that it used to be you had to wait 60 days from a trade to So like if Schroder got traded to Golden State, they would have to wait 60 days, 2 months prior to including him in another trade where he was packaged with multiple players, where he was aggregated in another trade. So it would be hard to acquire someone and then retrade them later in the season unless you're doing like a 1-for-1 swap after the acquisition. And then it's like, what's the plan? Couldn't you have just worked out a three-team deal at some other later date? But in the new CBA, if a player is traded prior to December 16th, then the 60-day rule does not apply, and they were able to be traded on the day before, that'd be February 5th, or the day of February 6th, the trade deadline this year. So specifically, there was some incentive for the Warriors to trade for Dennis Schroder now. So the value of patience, right, for specifically the Nets, and saying like, well, what if we could hold out and get, Dennis Schroder's hooping. What if we could get a little bit more for him? Well, it's twofold. One, they won 10 of their first 25 games. And this is wild. I learned this reading John Schumann's NBA Power Rankings on NBA.com. Of the Nets' first 25 games, 17 of them came against teams that were 500 or better. They played an incredibly tough schedule in the first 25 games, and they freaking won a bunch of them, including an impressive West Coast road trip that included victories over the Golden State Warriors and Sacramento Kings. So the Nets were incentivized to get rid of, move on from Schroder because they're winning too much, and there was going to be some more interest on the side of the Warriors to go ahead and get it done because they could trade him in the future. You meet, two teams with sort of conflicting but matching incentives, and you find a way to get a deal to happen. And by virtue of being traded officially on Sunday, Schroder can be traded again at the All-Star break for Jimmy Butler. I'm not reporting anything, but you know the vibes for Paul George in a few weeks, in whatever 60 days. Let's talk about what else is happening in the rumor mill. I've been to the rumor mill. I've been scouring. I'll bring in the latest, all I've got. Join me in that second segment. Actually, it's the third segment. See you on the other side. First, though, I want to tell you about Robinhood. Look, with Robinhood Gold, you don't need a silver spoon to eat up the financial favors of the 1%. Robinhood Gold allows others to get the rates and perks usually reserved for high society. Now, the resourceful individual with Robinhood Gold can earn the very liberal rate of 4.25% APY on uninvested cash and be rewarded with a handsome 3% retirement boost on IRA account contributions. Robinhood Gold provides the privileges of high net worth for any net worth. These generous benefits are now available for only $5 a month. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. Sign up today at robinhood.com/gold. Terms apply. For product-specific disclosures, visit robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risks. Rate may change. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold, LLC. Today's show is also brought to you by Rocket Money. It's the personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one place, whether it's your subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So Rocket Money is really useful to pull up the app, log in, say like, here's my info, find all the subscriptions I'm using. Oh, I have freaking 2 Netflix accounts. Oh my goodness. But it also has like simple things like set a budget. Okay. Say you want to spend X number of dollars on groceries. Well, Rocket Money will notify you, say, hey, Mike, you're getting a little close on your grocery budget here midway through the week or midway through December. Or it'll say at the end of December, hey, you did it. You're way lower. You're $85 lower than last month. Great job. So Rocket Money is not just the place to track down your subscriptions to make sure you're not overpaying. It's a way to get on top of all of your money. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Still a pass first point guard. I'm still Mike Richmond, and you are still listening to Locked On Blazers. So there's going to be a race to the bottom I don't think the Blazers are going to necessarily. In fact, one of my bold predictions for the year is that only one of the Blazers opening night starters gets traded. So among the basically, we're talking about Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant, and DeAndre Ayton. I think only one of them. I don't think they're not going to trade Denny. They didn't trade 2 friggin' first-round picks for Denny to trade him again. And Tumani is like their big find. Tumani is their thing they can point to say, look what we found in this trade with Phoenix. We got it. Like we found a really useful role player, like straight up like helpful on any team type of player in that deal. Not going to trade those dudes. So we're really talking, my bold prediction is that they're only going to trade one of the opening night starters, Anthony Simons, Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton. I think they will trade one. I would assume they will attempt to varying degrees to trade all 3. But it's going to be hard to trade DA. Jeremy Grant, iffy market, but like certainly is helpful if the right team is willing to pay him the rest of his money, or at least pay him some of the money and then figure it out later. And Anthony Simons, kind of also iffy trade market, but like the right team, if they need bench scoring, could upgrade the real high level bench scoring, or maybe the really specific team could like use him as an undersized 2 as a small 2 in like the right starting lineup. It doesn't matter if he starts or comes off the bench necessarily. His skill set will be his skill set regardless. I think the Blazers are going to make deals, right? A deal to some extent. The deals, I guess, is the extent to which I'm questioning here. I think they're probably only going to be able to trade one of those guys. But they're going to get, if they aren't able to make deals, they are going to make up injuries whole cloth. We have seen them do it in the past. I think some people skirt around calling it what it is, but the Blazers will lie about injuries, straight up make up injuries in order to pursue losses after the All-Star break. We've seen them do it before. We don't need to pretend like they won't do it again. But as the bottom of the standings get more crowded, it gets, I don't know if it gets more challenging, but there are more teams with similar incentives. And if you see a team like the Nets say like, we already think we're winning too many games in December. And obviously the Nets are like a very specific case because they probably are like winning. They probably thought they might win like, 19 games all season, and they won 10 of their first 25. And they're like, we hired too good of a coach. Jordy, get out of here. You are doing way too good of a job. Can you chill? They're making their moves. But if monitoring the sort of trade wins, other teams are going to head this direction. According to Mark Stein and Jake Fisher of the Stein Line, when they were surveying NBA teams last week, the teams most willing to make a deal, from what they had heard, and this was prior to the Schroder trade, was that Washington, Utah, and Brooklyn, if you called them right now, were willing to make a deal. Well, let's go to the bottom of the standings. Washington has the worst record in the league. Utah has the 3rd worst record in the league. And Brooklyn, unfortunately, the 8th worst record in the league, but would love to be down there where the bottom 2 are. Some funny part about that reporting is that the asking price reported in the story from the Stein Line is for Dorian Finney-Smith and Dennis Schroder of the Brooklyn Nets was supposedly 1 first-round pick. He was eventually traded for 3 seconds, 3 one way, 1 the other way, 3 and 1, as opposed to just 2 straight up, I guess. But like, it shows you like any of the reporting, and I've seen some of this out there, like the Blazers are asking for 2 firsts, and the Blazers are asking for 1, we're comfortable with 1 first for Jeremy Grant. That's all nonsense. There's not like a freaking trade block where you like video game style update the asking price. You call every day and you ask folks, what would it take to get a deal done? Here's what we're looking for, draft compensation. Okay, thanks. We'll call you back when we're getting closer. Here's what we have, a first-round pick. That's not going to do it for us. So maybe if you talk to that GM and that agent, they say, they're asking for 2 firsts. Well, another team calls back and say, we've got this first-round pick. Can we make the money work? Oh, we don't really like the money, but we like the pick. Okay, well, from that team, they like the pick, so it only takes 1 pick from that team. The lack of reporting nuance around here being the internet drives me a little bit insane, but I'm not going to aggregate people that I don't respect. I'll respect the good reporters and try to bring you the nuance that I am capable of. So if Stein and Fisher say that Washington, Utah, and Brooklyn are itching to make deals, and then Brooklyn immediately makes a deal that was a story they sent out Wednesday morning, then the trade goes down, agreed to late Saturday and finished on Sunday, completed on Sunday. It's like, yeah, Brooklyn was for real itching to make a deal. And the speculation, according to Stein and Fisher, is that Toronto, Portland, and Chicago are figure to join the mix. And that isn't that they are active, it's that NBA teams anticipate Toronto, the fourth worst record in the league, Portland, the sixth worst record in the league, and Chicago, the 10th worst record in the league, after beating those Raptors this evening, would be open for business. And Toronto has some incentive with a protected pick to make sure that they end up where they need to end up. Obviously, the Blazers, like, their path has to be back to the lottery. Clearly, that's where they're aiming. And Toronto is in the midst of a rebuild as well, albeit with varying levels of veterans and well-paid players in tow. Also, according to Stein and Fisher, the New Orleans Pelicans, yes, the team with the second worst record in the league, is willing to trade anyone not named Herb Jones, Trey Murphy III, or Yves Missi. Yves Missi has been one of the best rookies in the league. No surprise. Trey Murphy is young, tantalizing upside, and hasn't gotten the bag yet. They just gave Herb Jones a very reasonable contract. Really what this reads as, the Pelicans would be willing to trade Zion Williamson. They're obviously willing to trade Brandon Ingram. They'd be happy to trade you to CJ McCollum if you want them. The veterans are for sale in New Orleans for the right price. The 5-22 New Orleans, they're going to stay at the bottom of the standings. And I think this is the takeaway from reading the trade chatter and reading the sort of rumors. And I prefer the how the sausage get made stuff to the pithy tweets about here's a trade. I respect people who do the craft. I really do. It sounds like the quote unquote loaded 2025 draft class. And we'll kind of see what it is. I think people said the 2024 draft class sucked, and I would say so far they look right to me. That does seem to be correct. But the 2025 draft class supposedly loaded. It's like there are, as we get here, the teams that are aiming for the bottom of the standings from the beginning of the year: Washington, Utah, Portland, Brooklyn. They're going to want to stay there. And a team that kind of stumbled themselves into that spot, like the Pelicans, says, we would like to stay here too. And I think that makes it a little bit tough for the Blazers, because you don't want to lose every game for the remainder of the season, right? There's humans involved in the basketball games. And there's some sort of atrophy of losing every single night, where it's just we don't know how to play right if you never have some wins in some competitive games. I don't think the Blazers are necessarily in danger of doing that yet, but you can get into that direction in a hurry, particularly when you start shutting guys down, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the takeaway here is it's going to be a party at the bottom of the standings. They're a coming. Everyone who is headed for the tank is still headed there, and the teams that are stuck down in the bottom are trying to stay there, so help them. And the Blazers, right in the mix. One of the teams that wants to lose. If you're complaining about things about the NBA, I don't give a hoot about three-pointers. I think the incentivized losing is bad. I think the fact that in December I am talking about, well, these other teams are probably going to lose a lot, the Blazers better step their game up, that's bad. The draft incentives are bad for the league. Three-pointers, take them. I don't care. I think it's fine. Choose your own adventure. That's going to do it for today's show. Got some fun shows lined up for you later this week, including Rafael Barlow finally making his return to the program. We finally got our schedules linked up, so look for that one in Thursday's show. We'll have another one for you Wednesday. The Blazers play Thursday evening. Friday, we'll recap that game. Is what we do 5 days a week, wherever you get podcasts, also on YouTube. I appreciate you listening. I'll talk to you soon.